Hello, welcome back. If you've read the whole of the Bible, you will be aware that there are certain themes that run through it. One of those themes is the theme of faithfulness. And faithfulness has been something that I've been pondering over the weeks ever since we went into lockdown. In the Old Testament, we see that Adam and Eve are cast out of the garden because of their lack of faithfulness to what God says. Throughout the Old Testament, we see the prophets speaking and challenging the children of Israel to be faithful to God, not to be involved in idolatry. And idolatry is putting anything before God. In the Old Testament, it was often gods made of wood and stone and gold. Idolatry for us can be something else. It can be a house, a car, a person. It could be anything. But it's when something comes in front of God. Those Old Testament prophets constantly spoke to the children of Israel and encouraged them, challenged them to remain faithful. And when they didn't, well, we see some of those prophets speaking and telling them what is going to happen and why some of those things have happened. I'm reading at the moment the book of Ezekiel. And in it, Ezekiel says to the children of Israel, he says, God likens you to a prostitute. That's what you are. God has been faithful to you. God has challenged you to be faithful to him, but yet you have gone off and you have sold yourself to the other nations. And now this is why this judgment has come upon you, because of their lack of faithfulness. That theme is continued into the New Testament, and particularly into the letters of Paul. Often we see him saying implicitly and explicitly, or we see him challenging the readers and believers to remain faithful in spite of the difficulties that they face. These verses in Romans chapter 18, beginning at verse 18, the theme of faithfulness is there implicit within them. In verse 18, Paul does what he does in many places. He does what I might call a comparison. He compares their present sufferings with the future glory. He says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. He was speaking not to nice middle-class Christians in nice homes with central heating and their dinners in the oven, and they've got the fridge and freezer packed out with stuff from the local supermarket. No, he spoke to people that often face challenging circumstances and situations, often suffering, often facing persecution. And he says, the present situation bears no comparison to the future glory that we will enjoy. It will be revealed in us in the future. But this sense throughout these verses about the present and the future, this is really the context for these verses. The present and the future. He said, not only is there a present and a future for us, but in verse 19 he says, for creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Not only do we look forward to that future glory, but creation waits with eager expectation. I don't know if you're waiting with eager expectation for anything today. I'm waiting for Drain Doctor with eager expectation, because our bath, the outlet, has been blocked for nearly 2 weeks. And we can't have a bath. And when you have a shower or a wash, the water bubbles up into the bath and it's full of stagnant water. And finally, they've said they should be coming today. I'm waiting with eager expectation. I hope they don't come in the next 10 minutes, otherwise this sermon might be somewhat curtailed. We've all been waiting at some time with eager expectation. And Paul says that creation is waiting for the revelation of the children of God. This idea of eager expectation, the idea of necks being craned, looking out for something, looking for something. Is it here? Is it coming? Is it nearly there? Believers, we are called now the sons of God, but yet what we have now is veiled. There are times I do not feel like a son or daughter of God. I do not feel like a child of God. In fact, sometimes I feel anything but. But yet we believe by faith. We believe by faith in God, because at this moment in time our who we are as children of God is veiled. And even though our circumstances are inconsistent with the fact that we are sons and daughters of the living God, we believe by faith. And Paul says at this moment in time, creation waits for the children of God to be revealed. We see the word revealed in verse 18, and we see it also in verse 19. It's going to be revealed. It is going to happen sometime in the future. In verse 20, he says, for creation was subject to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will who subjected it in hope. Creation was subject to the laws of God, distinct from us. In verse 21, he goes on to talk about creation being set free. Creation itself will be liberated from its bondage. What was that bondage? Well, in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 17, it says that when Adam and Eve were thrust out of the garden, that God cursed the ground. And he said that thorns and thistles would grow upon it. Creation was subject to decay and to death in exactly the same way that we are subject to death and to decay. No different. But as we, the children of God, will be brought into freedom and glory, so creation will be set free from the bondage to decay and death and destruction that it has been, and will be set free in the same way that we are. And that is why he says that creation's looking forward. You know, I don't know if the flowers in your garden are looking forward to it, I don't know, but this expectation that the whole of creation is looking forward to the freedom that we're going to get as the children of God, because as that happens, they will also, creation itself will be set free from decay and from death. In verse 22, Paul says, we know that the whole of creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to this present time. I've never physically heard anything in my garden groaning. But that's not what he literally means. He's talking about that sense of eager expectation, looking forward, that this death and decay which has been around since God spoke those words in Genesis 3:17, that creation is looking forward, and it's almost as if it were groaning. Just as in looking forward to something good coming forth. I've been at the birth of 3 of my children. I won't go into too much detail, but there is some degree of noise and groaning. But actually, ultimately, there is an end product, and that end product brings forth joy. It's a joy that is looked forward to throughout the process of pregnancy. It is a joy that is looked forward to even in those final, and he said minutes and hours probably is what is truer. But ultimately, what is brought forth brings forth joy. And also it brings forth joy. It brings forth the liberty of not being pregnant any longer. Paul says, but even as creation is groaning with expectation, in verse 23, he says, not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, I'll come back to that in a minute, we ourselves groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. Paul says that not only is creation growing, not only is creation looking forward, but we ourselves as Christians, we're looking forward. He says that we've got the first fruits of the Spirit. Well, what is that? Well, you'll have noted in my sermon last week, I talked about that as we put our faith and trust in Christ, God by his Spirit comes and dwells within us. That is the first fruits. The work of the Spirit in us is the first fruits of being sons and daughters of the living God. It's that work of the Spirit that means that we can't just sit back and let injustice happen without saying something about it. It's the work of the Spirit that challenges us to be generous towards other people and forgiving. It's the work of the Spirit in us that brings love, joy, peace and long suffering. Doesn't make us perfect. Let's get that out of the equation straight away, because I might as well turn this off now and pack up. Doesn't make us perfect, but the work of the Spirit in us, that transforming work of the Spirit, making us more Christ-like, is the first fruits. And that's what Paul's referring to. Not only so, comma, but we ourselves have the first fruits of the Spirit, comma. Those first fruits of the work of God within each of our lives. It's evidence of the work of God in us, and is also evidence as to what will take place in a fuller and greater measure in the future. He said, we also groan inwardly because we're waiting eagerly for the full revelation of our adoption as children of God. We've got it partially, but it's being veiled. It's veiled. And I said, I don't always feel like a child of God. I sometimes feel anything but. But in actual fact, I am a child of God. As I believe by faith and the work of the Spirit is taking place within my heart and life, I look forward to the fullness of the full revelation of God in me. We're looking forward. Why? Because we are yearning for the coming of God. We're yearning for our adoption. It's currently partial, but it will ultimately be fulfilled. And we will be revealed as sons and daughters of God, with a final liberation from the effects of sin and from death. In verse 24, the word hope, is used 4 times. For in this hope we were saved, but hope that is seen is no hope at all. For who hopes for what they already have? I speak at all of my funerals about the great Christian hope. Hope that death is not the end. But for those who have put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ, God desires to welcome us beyond death's door. That is the great Christian hope. And I commit everyone into that hope because I do not know what has happened in everyone's life. I do not know fully the grace of God. And it's into that hope that I commend everyone at every one of my funerals. Paul says here, in this hope we were saved. We were saved, we put our faith in Jesus Christ in the hope that there will be an eternal fulfillment of that. It's not a hope that we've already seen, no. It's a hope based upon our faith in God. And we know that our eternal fulfillment lies in the future. And finally, in verse 25, he says this, but if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. We wait for it patiently. Christian life is characterized by steadfast hope in that which has not been openly revealed. That's my hope. I hope it's your hope. It's a hope that we wait for patiently. And it's a hope that as we wait for needs to be shot through with faithfulness. As we wait, we can think, what's happening? Nothing seems to be changing. In fact, if anything, things seem to be getting worse. Circumstances aren't getting better. Is God going to do this? We all have our questions, which is why I started by saying if we look back through the Old Testament, we see God's continued call to faithfulness, and we see the way that God has continued to be faithful to his people down through the centuries. God's faithfulness is not in any doubt. But God challenges us. Paul challenges us. The prophets of the Old Testament challenge us. And as we read the scriptures, they challenge us to remain faithful to the hope that we have. Our eternal hope is steadfast and certain. There's an old hymn, which I remember the line of it, says something like, talks about our hope being steadfast and certain and has gone through the curtain into the very presence of God. And I often remember that line, that our hope is steadfast and it is certain. Can I encourage you today, whatever your circumstances are, maybe you should take a while and to ponder. And maybe to be challenged again about our need to continue to hope in God, to wait patiently and to be faithful to the calling that God has put upon us. Amen.